Welcome to If the Public Only Knew, the show that pulls back the curtain on what it really takes to build and lead a business. Host Gary Cinderbrandt sits down with some of today's most dynamic CEOs, founders, and leaders to dig into their origin stories, hard-earned lessons, and the missteps that nearly derailed it all. These are unfiltered, no-hype conversations designed to inspire, challenge, and fuel your own journey. Now here's your host, Gary Cinderbrandt.
Welcome back to If the Public Only Knew. I'm your host, Gary Cinderbrandt. Today we're joined by Doug Thorpe. And Doug, of all the guests I've had on this podcast thus far, probably has one of the most variable stories I've learned about yet. Starting at a pretty young age, there was a spark of something when you watched your mother with her interior design business. And fast forward, now runs, for all intents and purposes, one of the most successful executive leadership and management training companies out there. Doug, welcome to the podcast. It's a pleasure to have you today.
Thank you, Gary. It is a pleasure to be here. And you didn't tell me I was going to have the pressure there of standing up to that standard, but happy to be here. We'll give it a shot.
We can always edit it out if it doesn't work out so well. So take me back. You grew up in Texas. Take me back to the first time you had some inkling to get more involved than a typical kid would in a business that was your mom was running. Walk me through that, if you would.
Yeah, there's actually somewhat two parallel tracks I'd like to talk about. The big one you're alluding to is the story I've told that I was an only child of a hardworking single mom. She had made a commitment to not remarry, and but of all things, when I was about 10 years old, she quit her day job to start a business, and pretty gutsy move. By anybody's standard, it was her and I, and that's all there was. But she had faith in what she believed in, and you named it. Her specialty was interior design, so she started a little boutique firm doing that. And many of from that point forward, all of my available hours and summer jobs and all that was helping her in her business. So I kind of grew up on construction job sites, watching houses get built or other buildings developed, and I kind of went alongside. I was the gopher and the heavy lifter and all of that, and I didn't really know at the time what that meant, that, owning a business and running a business all on your own. And there were moments I saw her agonizing over her checkbook at night, and doing those things, making the calls to try to collect invoices that had not been paid and things such as that. But as I got older, I reflected on what she was doing and how she was doing it. And I actually have a keynote talk that I called 10 Things I Learned from a Hardworking Single Mom. And it's all about entrepreneurship. But to your point, that did in fact fuel a spark in me. I admired her independence and what seemed to be the freedom that she got from doing her own thing. And that kind of stuck in the back of my mind. The other thing, I alluded to a dual track going along there. The other thing, I had something in me about servant leadership before servant leadership was a thing. I set my sights when I was in elementary school. Back in my day, we sent kids out into traffic with stop signs. We had crossing guard patrols. I know that's unheard of now. It's blasphemy, and people would just shudder at that thought today, but that's the way we did it once upon a time. And I admired the kids that were doing that. And I said, when I grow up, I'm going to be on that. And I think I want to be ahead of it. And it wasn't really so much an ego thing. It was just a sense of need for service. And sure enough, I rose up, and by the time I was in sixth grade, I was captain of the whole thing. So we have a joke in my family now, captain of the crossing guard. I may put out a statement to the family about some dictum that we're going to follow, and they'll go, "Oh, crossing guard Doug," and here he goes again. But nonetheless, that was also kind of my early taste of leadership, and for me, that became kind of a lifelong journey as well.
So it's fascinating. So you started, because from an entrepreneurial standpoint, you don't really associate most entrepreneurs slash founders with ultimately evolving into great leaders. You'll see a lot of kind of the lone wolf approach. They want to pursue their own ideas. And there's a lot of studies that have been done which demonstrate that people that start out in an entrepreneurial role, 9 times out of 10, don't end up as leaders of great companies. They'll bring in other professionals because you're now doing things that maybe you're not so interested in doing: payroll, HR, tax returns, all those. So you start to evolve from this leadership position, which essentially, I'm not sure exactly where it came from. Was that anything to do with perhaps your mother opting to forge her own direction and kind of exercise self-leadership?
I think it was, but also a factor that I speak of often is that she had the wisdom to surround me with mentors at a very young age. And at any one point in time, from the time I was about 8 years old on up into high school and ultimately college, I always had two or three mentors I could call on. I had men that I could reach out to. We'd go get a hamburger and have a talk, or we'd go fishing or golfing or something. And that kind of became the patchwork quilt that shaped a lot of my worldview and ideas and thoughts about what it meant. Now, these individuals, were they perfect human beings? Of course not. They each had their flaws, but it allowed me to get a peek into some of the complexities of life, and I got to kind of go to the buffet and pick and choose what I valued and what I respected, and I could shun what I didn't admire or what I didn't like about what they might be doing. And that kind of became my journey.
Did you kind of, at that point, as you were picking and choosing, did you think about the derivation of where that wisdom came from in the mentors that you were associated with, how they developed their wisdom?
I didn't originally think about it in that shape. It came to me much later, and it was a bit of a, if I may just be very candid, it was a bit of a spiritual revelation. There's a scripture in the New Testament that says it alludes to the fact that your salvation is not from the futile ways of your forefathers. And that got me thinking. It's like, okay, I value what he told me, but is that really all that good? I mean, where did he get it? And it must have been handed down from some generational male influence in his life. And was that even valid? And you keep going backwards, and you say, ultimately, at least according to scripture, that's a futile thought. It's one thing to receive good learning and teaching, but you can't hang everything on that. You have to look further and look deeper. And of course, per scripture, the message is, I look to God for that ultimate guidance and the ultimate father figure I follow.
Well, I think when you say that, that to me means looking inward and facing things that most people may find uncomfortable. And I know we're off on a tangent here, but in the world of financial advisory, I spent my career. Um, Ultimately, you're paid fees for guiding people, and they're not paying you to create transactions. They're paying you for your wisdom, which oftentimes means preventing them from making a mistake. So when I think about wisdom, I think about it in at the intersection of experience and self-reflection. Everybody's got experiences, but having the wherewithal and the fortitude to honestly self-reflect and come up with some guiding principle as a result of things you've done, that's, I think, where most people fall short. And I think that kind of brings us back to where you are now in more of a leadership position, because I don't think people are hiring you because you're a great speaker and a snappy dresser. You're getting hired because they perceive wisdom in what
Right.
you guys do. Would that be a
Agreed.
fair statement?
Totally. Totally.
And it's interesting because I still do a lot of consulting work with senior advisors, among other things. And it's interesting that I can spot things that they're doing. And I'll say, have you thought about that? Yeah, I've thought about it, but I just can't pull the trigger and do anything about it. So the experience will repeat, but there's no real learning taking place. When you run into things like that in your current career, where people know they should change, but it's almost like a cognitive dissonance. How do you overcome that? How do you get them to expand their mind and take that chance to make the change, which may be very obvious to you?
Well, there's inevitably a couple of possibilities at play there. One, and probably first and foremost in the human psyche, is some level of fear. There's a fear of change. There's a fear of doing it different, and to try to peel that onion and get to the root of it. It's not about so much the change itself, but what do you fear about the change? What story is being played in your mind about what is going to happen when that change is implemented? And that's usually a pretty pivotal starting point to get people to reflect. Sometimes the fear goes back to what we coaches classically call limiting beliefs. The individual will ultimately admit that somewhere along the way they were convinced or pre-programmed, as probably every child who's ever lived has something they hang on to. You're not tall enough, you're not fast enough, you're not pretty enough, you're not smart enough. Those kind of negative beliefs that get instilled. And there is an element. I always joke that we as coaches, we run perilously close to being therapists when we talk to our clients, and by our own code of moral standards, we don't do that, but we come right up to the line most of the time.
So I agree with everything you're saying. When I think about this concept of limiting factors normally accumulate kind of an emotional dead weight in your mind. And those types of things, the problem is that they don't age out. They exist in an area of your brain that doesn't really recognize time, almost associated with PTSD, because you're just convinced if you do that thing, it's going to bring you right back to whatever you did before that didn't work out so well. And it's kind of hard to program it out. It does require taking a risk. Most folks don't think in terms of how anchored a lot of emotional memories become, both good and bad. By way of
Right.
example, if I asked you what you had for breakfast, unless you eat the same thing every day, 3 weeks ago, last Tuesday, would you remember?
No,
Okay.
no.
Tell me what it was like the first time you soloed an airplane.
Oh, that I remember.
There you go. That's exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah, yeah,
It was like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm doing this.
right.
Exactly. And you can just see the smile it brought to your face as it does me being a fellow pilot. That's something you'll never forget. But that's the concept of these emotionally anchored memories. Now, having the ability to recognize that you can leave the earth and come back safely on your own is a great, happy feeling. But those negative feelings can anchor in the same way. And that's kind of what we fight against sometimes.
Right, right.
So identifying it sometimes is not the whole thing. How do you work people through that if they're just stuck with that limiting factor?
Well, if I may, and I'll get back to that question, but I'll also add the other interesting thing that I've observed with a lot of the high performance executives and leaders that I get to work with. There's a strange economy with recognizing a win. When something is successful, like in your case, if you closed a big account and you brought that over the goal line, well, that's a win by just about anybody's standard. But chances are, and if I may, I'll pick on you a little bit. Chances are you probably said to yourself, I was supposed to do that. That's not a big deal. I was that's just growing my book. I'm supposed to be doing that. And now you go, what's next? Right, and move on to the next one. And there is a value in finding out a way to claim those wins and stack them up like blocks in your foundation. And often, what I'll do, I'll run into an executive that is mid-career or later, and they're now facing their maybe I'll say fourth or fifth promotion and movement in a business, and they'll be petrified. They'll be scared to death about making that move. And I'll go, well, wait a minute, let's go back 10 years when you got that first big promotion. Do you remember how uncertain and concerned you were about that? And we'll spend some time talking about it. And I go, yeah, now you're right. Now that we talk about it, I go, and you did it okay, right? You got through it to the point now you're being recognized yet again. So why is today different from that day? And inevitably, they always say, well, it's not really. I mean, yeah, the scope maybe is a little bigger and different, but ultimately, no, it's really not any different. So it's okay, then grab that win, let that fuel and help shift your mind about the possibilities for this new opportunity.
Interesting. So is it more from the perspective of this executive you described, thinking that they have kind of limited up, they're not going to move any further, and then they're undeserving of that next promotion? Is it like almost an imposter syndrome as they move up that fuels
Yeah,
them?
it's classically talked about and often presented to me as imposter syndrome. People have read articles about it and they're feeling that. But again, it comes somewhat back to my other point is, what are you afraid of? If this new situation truly does fail, what does that look like? And what do you think is going to happen? Is it truly going to be a career-ending move if it does? Or have you allowed it to get spun up as something that it's not really ever going to be?
Interesting. When I think about leadership, I think about it in kind of three terms, three ways. Um, there are people that make things happen. There are people that watch things happen. And then people sit around and go, what the hell just happened? I'm sure you've been exposed to all three. How do you take someone that you know possibly has the potential to lead, to step up? And I agree with you, servant leadership, you hear more about it now than ever, but the great financial advisors are all servant leaders. That's what we do, period. We eat well, but we eat last. And if
Mm-hmm.
you don't eat last, you're not gonna be in the business very long. But how do you get the people that are kind of bystanders or they're drafting off someone else, moving up the ladder because they're filling a vacuum instead of leading from the front, when you know that they've got the potential to lead from the front? How do you ignite that spark?
Typically the way, and you're spot on, by the way, and the way I tend to describe it to people is we have a strange tradition in modern business. If your business is any size, even I'm speaking to entrepreneur founders that are out there that have scaled their business to, more than a half dozen people. You're looking at the business saying, I need a supervisor for this team. And what do? You go pick the best performer. You go look at that team and you identify the best performer. And you can't lie to me, Gary. I know you guys did that in financial advisory. The best producer got an opportunity to be an area manager. And we do that to people, and we make no real assessment of their potential for becoming a manager, much less a leader. And we throw them in the fire, and many people do figure out something. They find a way to survive and perhaps thrive in the role. But if they do thrive, what happens? They get promoted again.
Yeah.
And it goes on and on and on. And then the bigger companies, after about that third or fourth promotion, they inevitably go, maybe I should send this guy to some leadership training. Let's get him a coach.
Interesting.
Let's help him develop. Well, that probably should have happened at the first promotion.
It's funny because there's a great similarity going on in financial services right now, which few people know about. There's a huge age gap between the folks in financial advisory that are age 60 plus and the next 15 to 20 years downstream, such that over the next probably 5 to 8 years, over 100,000 financial advisors will retire, and there's no pipeline to replace them. And these are the senior guys that control pretty massive amounts of money, $300, $400, $500 million in other families' assets. Well, so what all the firms have tried to do, they've all given up their training programs. So what they've said is, we want the senior guys to be leadership of their team. We want you to find junior guys, or we'll assign them to you. We want you to train them to become you. Meanwhile, the senior people, guys like myself, we started with nothing. We started with a desk, a phone, and that's it. And there was no plan B. If we didn't make it, you're gone, 90% fail rate. Well, now you're bringing in this whole new generation of folks who don't have the pressure to figure it out on their own. And they're going to work for people that, by and large, have succeeded because they've been independent. They've been entrepreneurial. They never had to learn how to lead. They never had to learn how to run a team or a large business. And the disconnect is substantial of what we see. So it's almost like the firm or the demographics are putting advisors into a spot where they're forced to become team leaders, but no one went into financial advisory to become a team leader, because they would have moved, as you said, they would have moved into management a long time ago. And the disconnect there is pretty substantial. There's a lot of coaches that we have in the financial advisory industry who are very good at coaching and trying to form better bonds for teams. But the senior guys, the entrepreneurs that built the business, they're resistant because it doesn't fit who they are and doesn't support what they've done their whole career. How do you square that circle?
Well, I think that is one of the ultimate conundrums, and it is prevalent in the entrepreneurial space. When we talk about the classic entrepreneur founder, the man or woman that comes up with this great idea and says, I'm going to build a company around this. They go to work and they start building something. You're absolutely right. Everything is about the delivery of their product or service. And as I alluded to a minute ago, if you get traction, you've got to scale by adding people to the team, because you, Mr. Owner, Mrs. Owner, you only have so many hours in the day. That's just a hard, non-negotiable reality. So if you want to keep scaling, you've got to begin building some kind of a team. And, the first tripwire that most founders run into is the idea, yeah, well, they can't do it like I'm going to do it.
Sure.
And it's that, some might go so far as to call it an ego factor, but it's, to be a little more diplomatic, I call it founder-itis. And you're kind of stuck. And what I tell people is, okay, whatever that ceiling is, if that sustains the lifestyle you want to live, good for you. Guess what? You now have a lifestyle business, and congratulations. But if you really want to increase your own personal wealth and create something that may potentially be a saleable asset down the road, you have to build that team. You have to build systems. You have to build something that runs without you, or you don't have a saleable asset.
So let's go down that path just a little bit, if I may. Let's say that there is a SaaS-based product, a software product that is unique, that is going after a market that is ready to be disrupted. It's an old school market that's got literally hundreds of millions of dollars, and this singular product can alter the course of that. It's got early mover advantage, it's got a patent, it's got a moat, it's going to have demand, and the founder who built it, it's their baby. They know it's going to get huge. They get some initial traction. They know they want to build it. How do they find that team to go out and care for this thing, which done properly will become a saleable asset, possibly many times over?
Well, it does become a huge challenge that entrepreneurs will face, and it it's a hunt for talent is what it amounts to, and I'm thinking of a story. I had a guest on my show a year or two ago, a gentleman that was telling the story of he and two partners built a restaurant chain out in California, and they had grown it up and done it very well, but out of the three of them, none of them was really a leader. They were all technical experts in different functions of the restaurant industry. And together they created a great harmony that was very successful up to a point. And when they hit a certain threshold, they were sitting in a meeting and they said to each other, I think we need to hire as a CEO that can take this business to the next level because I don't want to do it. And the second guy said, I don't want to do it. And the third guy said, I don't want to do that. I mean, be the CEO, I'm saying. So they orchestrated a search for a restaurant CEO that had a track record. Here's the key to it. You want to hire somebody. If you're sitting at a business that's running, let's use your SaaS guy, let's say he's got some MVP out in the market, is revenue positive, maybe he's making 5 million a year, but he believes it should be going to 25. Well, you got to go find the CEO that has already done 25 and knows how to operate at that level. You don't hire the guy that's also doing 5 and you're going to be a
Right.
partnership to take it to 25. Neither of you have the record for going there. So find the guy that's already done 25, entice him to come join your effort. You might have to give up stock or, equity or bonus to get them, but it'll be worth every penny of it because if you go from 5 to 25, your own wealth expands accordingly.
I think it's very sound advice, and I know there's a lot of businesses out there that have made that mistake, that have tried to run it, and occasionally they'll get lucky, and then they'll get a board, and the board will get rid of them for
Yeah,
some reason, maybe even bring them back at some point in time. So, Doug, talk to me about the type of clients you're looking for. How do people find you? What's your favorite type of engagement to get into?
absolutely, Gary. Well, my private practice is actually split a little bit. I do a lot of work in the Fortune 500 space, but I do that mainly through referrals. I don't market directly to Fortune 500, but I do take referrals. But my real passion, as you alluded to, is the entrepreneur. And I'm looking for owner founders that are in that kind of middle market space, as I call it anyway. It's companies that are running 5 million to upwards of 50 million annual revenue, teams of at least 10 or more, and that's the optimum client for me. And I can come in and either work with the owner or founder individually, or I can help them develop a leadership team inside their business. And that's the ultimate goal, is to create a well-functioning leadership team for that business. Going back to my other point, if you're the owner or founder, you want to do everything you can to create a saleable asset for some future exit point, because as some people joke, none of us get out of here alive. So there's going to be a day when you're going to want to exit that business.
Fascinating. Doug, thank you so much for joining me. I really enjoyed speaking with you. You can just tell you've been there, you've done that. School of hard knocks, as I like to call it, which I think is the most valuable degree anybody can get. Wish you all the best, sir. And thanks again for joining us on If the Public Only Knew.
Thanks for tuning in to If the Public Only Knew. Don't forget to follow the show and share it with anyone who's ready for the real raw stories behind the business successes. Join Gary next time for another powerful conversation that will leave you inspired and ready to take action.